a great honor for me once again to come to the European Parliament in order to report to you as to the action taken by the President of the Council at such a crucial juncture for Europe. I will try to speak very freely, as I think should be the case, in this forum, the heart of the democratic Europe to which we all aspire. What have we tried to build together? First and foremost, the presidency wanted the European institutions to stand together in the face of all these crises we have had to manage. I wanted the European Parliament to be involved at every moment in these major events we've been living through. And I would like to thank the presidents of your political groups, all of them together, who have got involved in this dialogue and worked together with the presidency of the Council. I also wanted to ensure that with the Commission, its President in particular, that we would work hand in hand, President of the European Parliament, because whatever the differences, whatever the divergences between all the people in this House, all of us know perfectly well that division between the European institutions will undermine Europe. The duty of those who bear responsibility is to work hand in hand. We will move Europe forward if the European Parliament, if the Commission and if the Council on these major issues manage to work on a basis of consensus in order to get the European voice heard. We wanted first and foremost for Europe to stand united. That was no easy matter. We wanted Europe to show independent thinking because the world needs Europe's thinking. And we wanted Europe to follow its line, to show clear will. If Europe has something to say, it shouldn't just say those things, it should take the steps to accompany its ideas. First and foremost, we saw war with a completely disproportionate reaction from the Russians in the case of the conflict with Georgia. And I use that term disproportionate because it was disproportionate to intervene as the Russians did in Georgia. And I also use the word reaction because the reaction was disproportionate, but that was because there was a preceding inappropriate action. And Europe has to be fair. Europe should not hesitate to step out of the ideological framework to put across a message of peace. On the 8th of August, this crisis was triggered. On the 12th of August, with Bernard Kouchner, we went to Moscow to achieve a ceasefire. I'm not saying it was perfect. All I am saying is that within 4 days, Europe managed to bring about a ceasefire. In early September, Europe received a commitment for withdrawal from the lines preceding the 8th of August crisis. In 2 months, Europe brought about an end to the war and the withdrawal of the occupying forces. Now, there were various different theses. People, maybe rightly so, said that dialogue was pointless, that a response to military aggression should be military. That was a folly. Europe saw the Berlin Wall come down, the end of the Cold War, and Europe should no longer be the accomplice of another Cold War, just because we can't keep a cool head. It was a problem that we overcame with our American allies, who thought that the trip to Moscow was inappropriate. Nevertheless, we played hand in hand with our American friends. Their position was not the same as ours, but we tried to build collaboration rather than opposition. And given the state of the world today, quite honestly, I don't believe the world needs a crisis between Europe and Russia. It would be irresponsible. So we can defend our ideas about the respect of sovereignty, the respect of the integrity of Georgia, human rights, the differences that we have with those who lead Russia. But it would be irresponsible to create the conditions for a conflict for which we have no need. The discussions began in Geneva on the future status of these Georgian lands, Ossetia, Abkhazia, and I've been told that they're starting in difficulty. But who could imagine anything else? The important point is that those talks are getting underway. President Medvedev has made commitments to the President of the Commission and of the European Council. He made those commitments when, at the beginning of September, we visited Moscow. Europe brought about peace. Europe has achieved the withdrawal of these occupying troops, and Europe wanted these international discussions. It strikes me that it was a very long time since Europe played this type of role within this type of conflict. Obviously, there are a lot of shortcomings, a lot of points of ambiguity, a lot of compromise has been made. But in all consciousness, I believe that we pulled out all the stops, and particularly, Mr. President of the Parliament, if Europe had not raised the voice of reason and dialogue, who would have done that? And when, on the 12th of August with Bernard Kouchner, we went to Moscow and to Tbilisi, all the media throughout the world were fully aware of the fact that the Russians were 40 kilometers out of Tbilisi, and the aim was to overthrow Mr. Saakashvili's regime. That was the way things stood. We came a hair's breadth from catastrophe, but we took a determined stance, and so that catastrophe did not come about. Although, President Pöttering, obviously there is a long path ahead of us until the tensions are calmed in that area of the world. The second point, the financial crisis, a systemic crisis. It's incredible. It's amazing. This started on the 15th of September, not the 7th of August 2007. On the 7th of August 2007, a crisis. Yes, a serious crisis, a worrying crisis began. The 15th of August 2008, we moved into another crisis. What happened on the 15th of August 2008? Well, Lehman Brothers collapsed. And the world sat back in amazement, and on the 15th of August 2008, saw that a bank can go bankrupt. It's not up to me to provide a judgment of what the American government did or didn't do. All I'm saying is that on the 15th of September 2008, the serious crisis became a systemic crisis with the collapse of the American financial system, followed by the collapse of the European financial system, and then gradually other financial systems and stock exchanges. So, what did we try and do? We saw the Paulson 1 plan. It didn't work. And I'm not criticizing it in saying that. I'm just saying what actually happened. And then, with the President of the Commission at that stage, what we tried to do was to build a common European response. Firstly, within the Eurozone. Mr. President, you mentioned this, whether we were in favor or against. In the zone, we have the same bank, the same currency, and therefore the same duty towards unity. In order to achieve a common position, it was no easy matter. First and foremost, we proposed a meeting of the 4 European countries who are members of G8. I'm not insulting anyone to say that the influence of the UK, for example, on the global financial system is greater than that of other countries among the 27. And I said that if amazingly we could manage to bring the British, the French, the Germans and the Italians into agreement, it wouldn't be against the other Europeans, it would be in their service. Obviously there were different analyses, and I don't think anyone can reproach us for that, because in the initial days of this crisis, we didn't know exactly what was the correct response to give to this unprecedented crisis within economic history, at least in the 20th century. And then I said, well, basically, we brought the 4 together. Now, we should bring together the countries of the Eurogroup, plus Slovakia, who are going to join us. And that extra week allowed us, together, to come up with a solution which would allow the banks to do their job once again, to loan, to lend. They were no longer lending between themselves, they no longer had any money to lend. And the whole system was collapsing, nationalised banks in the UK, bankrupt banks in Belgium, the Icelandic system outside Europe, but very close to Europe, which collapsed. Further bad news in Switzerland, and gradually contagion, Germany, France. Everyone was affected. And within the Eurogroup, we managed to achieve an agreement on this huge plan, 1,800 million euros, to allow our financial institutions to get on with their work and to reassure European savers and business people. Then we went into the European Council, which adopted the same strategy. And as of that moment, we were able to calm the markets in Europe. Good surprise, Paulson too then appeared. And we all saw that the Paulson II plan drew to a great extent on the European plan. No glory from that. All we have to do is think about the fact that this is a global crisis. So the response can only be global. And we have to be working in sync between Europe and America. This is crisis management, though, President. Nothing more, nothing less than crisis management. Had we not done this, what would have happened? We still have to provide the right responses. How was all this possible? How could we avoid, or how can we avoid all this reoccurring? Has Europe ideas to defend, the policy to put forward? And that's why in the UN General Assembly at the beginning of September, on behalf of Europe, I suggested that we should have an international group to look into the basis of a new Bretton Woods, bearing in mind what happened after the Second World War, in order to provide a new global financial system. And that idea is making headway. Within this summit, what should Europe be striving for? Europe has to put forward the idea of refounding global capitalism. What has happened has been the betrayal of the values of capitalism. It's not bringing the market economy into question. No rules. Basically, speculators have been rewarded, but we have to put forward the idea of a new basis, new regulation. Europe has to propose its ideas, and Europe will do so. Firstly, Mr. President, no bank which works with state money should be able to work with tax havens. No financial institutions, Mr. President, should be able to work without being covered by financial regulations. Traders, well, their payment systems are calculated and organized in such a way as they shouldn't be pushed into taking undue risk, as we've seen coming about now. The accounting rules within our banks, I think, should allow us to follow through the crisis. The monetary system should be rethought between fixed exchange rates and not exchange rates between the currencies. We've tried everything throughout the world. Can we, the rest of the world, continue to bear the deficits of the first world power without having our voice? Obviously, the answer to that is no. There's no point pointing the finger. What we have to do is find the ways and means to avoid this ever occurring again. I could say an awful lot more, but I would like Europe to have a say in global governance in the 21st century. We shouldn't be surprised if it's not working. We're in the 21st century, and we have the institutions which date from the 20th. The President of the United States and Europe together have proposed various different summits kicking off in mid-November, which will look at a new global governance, new regulations. I hope that Europe will be able to debate that. I will be able to propose to my partners, the heads of state and government, that we should meet to prepare for these summits. This question of refounding our international system, our capitalism, is a question of crucial importance also for the European Parliament, which has to debate this and put its ideas forwards. But Europe has to speak with one voice if we want to be heard. Who will take part in this summit? Well, there are a lot of different schools. I believe that the most straightforward thing would be G8, obviously with the Russians. We need to add G5 to that. Can't be avoided, because that will allow us to bring in China and India, in particular, in these essential debates. And with President Barroso, we are going to visit China, the aim being to convince the Asiatic powers that they should also participate in this refounding movement. President, there was a third issue which was very difficult during the presidency, and that's the future of the energy and climate package. I know perfectly well that your assembly and some of your groups are divided on the follow-up that should be given. Allow me to mention my beliefs and the policy we intend to propose. The energy climate package is ambitious, and it's founded on the conviction that the world is moving towards disaster if it continues to produce under the same conditions. That is my analysis. I don't see one single argument which could lead people to say that the world is not doing so well from an environmental point of view because of the financial crisis. And when we decided to work on this energy climate package, we did so because we were fully aware of our responsibilities vis-à-vis our own children and the future of our planet. It's a structural policy. It's a historic policy. And it would be dramatic if we were to turn our backs on this policy using the pretext of the financial crisis. It would be dramatic and it would be irresponsible. Let me explain why. It would be irresponsible because Europe will be sending the signal that it is not determined to make the efforts it's promised to make on this front. And if Europe doesn't make its efforts, our chances of convincing the rest of the world that we have to preserve the global balance are completely non-existent. Obviously, it's not a question of Europe just stepping down for itself, but it would be vis-à-vis the world's commitments vis-à-vis the environment. Because if Europe doesn't set the example, it will not be listened to, heard or respected. And if Europe does not do this job, no one will do it in our place. So we will have missed our date with history. What does that mean if we miss that date? I think it means two things. Firstly, it means that we'll be backtracking on the objectives of 3 times 20. The second is backtracking on the calendar. I don't intend, I don't have the power, I don't have the will to question co-decision.
Et d'ailleurs, faut-il avoir de mauvaises pensées pour m'avoir prêté cette pensée-là?
I mean, you'd have to have some very bad ideas in your head to have thought that I was thinking that. But
me prêter des pensées, c'est déjà un compliment.
Obviously, it's excellent, you know, if you're going to put ideas into my head. But in this whole issue, we fought at the European Council with President Barroso to ensure that the objectives are respected as well as the timetable. It was no easy matter. We have a few weeks ahead of us to convince some of our partners. I do understand their concerns. You can't create the conditions for compromise unless you try and understand what someone thinks if they don't agree with you. We've got some economies which depend 95% on coal, and we can't ask them to do things which would bring them to their knees when they're already facing huge difficulties. So we're going to have to find the ways and means towards flexibility in respect of the 2 red lines I proposed to the Council: respect of the objectives, respect of the timetable. Mr. President, I will have the opportunity, possibly elsewhere, to explain this at greater length. I don't want to abuse your patience, though, but I will say that's what we wanted to do, and I hope that everyone will be able to follow it. If I can just touch briefly on the 4th point, the Immigration Pact, to say that I believe that this is a great example of European democracy. Despite the starting differences, all of us have been able to rally behind an immigration policy which has been worked upon with the countries from which the immigrants come. We have to draw the conclusions from Schengen, which applies to 3/4 of European countries. And if we have got rid of visas amongst ourselves, then it's quite reasonable that those countries which don't need visas to move from one to another should take on board the same body of thinking for a European immigration policy. There are 2 points before I close. Firstly, the financial crisis has brought with it an economic crisis. The economic crisis is here. It's pointless to forecast it, because we're living through it now. Personally speaking, I'm fully aware of the disagreements between certain countries, but I cannot imagine people explaining to me that in the face of the financial crisis we needed a united European response, but in the face of the economic crisis, we don't need the same united European response. And very briefly on what I mean by united, it doesn't mean the same response. For the financial crisis, we proposed a toolbox, a roadmap, harmonization, coordination. And I think that as far as economic policy is concerned, we should do the same thing. It doesn't mean we're all going to do exactly the same thing, but it does at least mean that we're required to talk about it. We're required to mutually inform each other, and on certain subjects, we need to discuss this, to work together on this. There are certain ideas. Allow me to mention one. The stock exchanges are at historically low levels. I don't want European citizens a few months from now to wake up and discover that European companies belong to non-European capitals who have bought at the lowest point of the stock exchange, who would take over ownership, and the European citizens would then turn around and ask, well, what did you do? I would ask that all of us here should think about how interesting it might be for us also to set up sovereign zones in each of our countries. And maybe those national sovereign funds could now and again coordinate in order to give an industrial response to the crisis. Allow me to add that I looked very carefully and with great interest at the American plan for the automobile industry. $27 billion interest rate. Unbeatable price to save the 3 American car producers from bankruptcy. Just let me say something about that in Europe. We are asking our manufacturers, rightly so, to produce clean cars, to completely change their production systems. And 50% now of the cars sold in my country are clean. Can we leave the European car industry in a situation of grave distortion of competition with its American competitors without asking about European sectoral policies in order to defend European industry? That does not mean that we have to bring into question the single market, nor does it mean that we need to question the principle of competition. It does not mean that we need to bring into question state aid. What it does mean is that Europe has to provide a single response. It can't be a naive response in the face of competition from the other major regions of the world. That's our duty. We should be able to continue to manufacture ships, trains, cars and airplanes in Europe because Europe needs a powerful industry. And on that policy, the presidency will stand up and fight. And finally, the institutions. I don't know whether that's a sigh of relief because I'm getting to the end of my speech, but or maybe because the other subjects were less important. The institutions are not the only European subject. We've concentrated too exclusively on this issue for too long, but the institutions are indeed a subject. I believe that the crisis calls us upon us to reform the European institutions. The crisis is a call for Europe to provide as powerful and rapid a response as possible as other world forces, for example the United States, have done in the face of the drama created by the financial crisis. I believe that it would be a major mistake if we were not to proceed to the reform of our institutions. Highly serious. Particularly because on such complicated issues as Russia and Georgia, the financial crisis, the economic crisis, it would not be reasonable to have a rotating presidency every 6 months. Whatever we voted in the last elections, allow me to say that if you love Europe, and I want Europe to speak with one single voice, I don't think it would be reasonable if we considered that things have to change every 6 months. So, with President Barroso, we will be working on a roadmap for December to see how we can provide a response to the Irish question. But before I leave the presidency of the Council, I intend to propose that roadmap and to indicate on a consensus basis the ways and means for getting out of this problem. And one final point. It's not possible for the Eurozone to continue without clearly identified economic governance. We cannot continue in this direction. I would like to pay homage to the action of the bank. The bank has to be independent, but if the action can be correctly deployed, then the bank has to be able to discuss with an economic government. And that was the spirit of the treaty: dialogue, democracy, and reciprocal independence. Genuine Eurogroup economic governance would be a Eurogroup that meets at head of state and government level. Well, I was absolutely stupefied when I asked for that meeting to see that this is the first time since the euro was brought in that this was happening. Well, honestly, you create a currency, you have your own central bank, you have a single monetary policy, but we don't have an economic government worthy of that name. Commissioner, we went into an effort to elect a president from the Ministers of the Economy and Finances. I was there. I was Minister of Finance at the time. And, well, it was a salutary effort, and I would like to pay homage to Jean-Claude Juncker and you yourself. But, obviously, given this current crisis, it's only the meeting of the Ministers of Finance cannot be up to dealing with that crisis on its own. We had to mobilize funds, and in order to do that, it was the heads of state and government, them alone, who had to be mobilized. They are the only ones who have the democratic legitimacy to shoulder these very heavy responsibilities and decisions. I could say an awful lot more, ladies and gentlemen, but by way of conclusion, allow me to say that the world needs a Europe with a strong voice. That is on your shoulders. It lies on the shoulders of the Commission, the shoulders of the Council as well. And allow me to say how useful it was for the Presidency, beyond the differences, to feel the solidarity of the European Parliament, which had analysed the gravity of this crisis from the word go, and which overcame differences and sensitivities to create unity within Europe. That's what I wanted to tell you. It's something in which I firmly believe. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président du Conseil.
Thank you very much, President of the Council, and now President of the European Commission, José Manuel Durão Barroso. President of the European Council, ladies and gentlemen, the European Council last week was the climax of a lot of intensive work designed to cope with the economic crisis in Europe. We came to an end of reacting off the cuff and arrived at a common position in order to make efforts to achieve stability in the European financial system. I would like to pay homage to President Sarkozy, He has been dynamic, he has been determined as only he can be, and he has given us the energy, the 27 countries, to work towards a series of joint principles and objectives. I'm also proud of the contribution made by the European Commission. As President Sarkozy said, we have always worked hand in hand with the French presidency. The European Commission has always stressed the fact that only a European response could have an impact on the scale required. At the European Council, we had an opportunity to agree on a very important pact on immigration in order to further manage the European agenda as we run up to the European Council in December. What we now need to do is draw up a roadmap for the Lisbon Treaty in order to properly prepare ourselves for 2009. With respect to the energy and climate change package, there we have to put in major efforts in order to reach an agreement before the end of the year. The European Commission will be working very closely with the presidency on this in order to find solutions which correspond to the concerns of all the member states. And here we are counting on the continued support of the European Parliament so that we can find an agreement. Now I'd like to concentrate this morning on our major concern at the moment, and that is the European economy. We have been working on three fronts. First of all, we are considering immediate actions at European level in order to get out of the financial crisis. Secondly, we are considering how to reform the international financial system. Thirdly, we're considering how to strengthen the real economy in order to minimize the consequences of the financial crisis and to set up the right conditions for relaunching the economy and increasing employment and manufacturing. I believe that Europe is in the right place in order to respond to the international crisis. The Camp David agreements last weekend showed very clearly what Europe can achieve when it works on a united basis. Let's be quite clear about this. We haven't achieved anything yet. We won't be able to, well, 2 or 3 months ago we couldn't get the American president on board with us, but now we've got our American partners with us. And I think we've now put in position the conditions we need to reform the international financial system. We're now going through an unprecedented period, and this requires a high level of coordination, also unprecedented. In order to put together a global response, we also need, of course, a global response. Europe has to mold the global response to the global problems. Globalization involves us in respecting the principle of openness and independence, and Europe, instead of suffering globalization, should mold and drive globalization with its values in order to serve its own interests. And I'm proud to be able to say that during this crisis, Europe has shown that it is able to meet the challenge.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you some more detail about our response to this crisis. Our first priority was to play our part as Commission in the rescue of financial institutions in difficulty. In doing this, we could count on the excellent cooperation we have had with Member States and with the ECB. Our next step was to come forward with a package of precise, targeted measures to address specific shortcomings on capital requirements, deposit guarantees or accountancy rules. Speed has been essential, and we have responded by accelerating our work. In the same vein, I was grateful to the rapidity with which this Parliament was able to conclude its consideration of the changes in accountancy rules. I know that you fully appreciate that the other proposals on the table deserve the same urgency. We also have to look at what other proposals will be needed to update and fill in the gaps of today's regulatory regime. We'll have the credit rating agencies' proposal next month. We will come with an initiative on executive pay based on a review of our 2004 recommendation. We will look at regulating derivatives. We will work constructively with the European Parliament on the follow-up to your recent resolutions, and we will look at implications for the 2009 Commission work programme. No area of the financial markets will be absent from this review. One important input for future action will be the results of the high-level group I have set under Jacques Larosière to look at cross-border financial supervision in Europe. I'm happy to announce to you today the composition of this group. It will be composed by Mr. Leszek Balcerowicz, Otmar Issing, Rainer Mazera, Callum McCarthy, Lars Nyberg, José Pérez Fernandes, and Onno Ruding. I'm asking this group to present first results in time for the Spring European Council. And I will be discussing this afternoon with your Conference of Presidents how to make sure that Parliament is plugged into this work. But as I said earlier, we will also have to promote a reform of the global financial system. The last months have shown that the Bretton Woods institutions have not kept up with the pace of integration of global financial markets. European Union-United States cooperation will be essential. As you know, European Union and the United States account for almost 80% of wholesale financial market. Not only this cooperation is important to get us out of this crisis, but even more, to avoid another one. In this respect, the discussions President Sarkozy and I had with President Bush last weekend were a major step forward. But it is not enough. We have to get other major players on board. I will be going to China later this week, where, together with President Sarkozy, I will raise this issue with the Chinese President and Prime Minister and with other Asian partners at the ASEM Summit. We need a critical mass of players involved. The goal should be to devise a system of global financial governance adapted to the challenges of the 21st century in terms of efficiency, transparency, and representation. Europe is leading the way, and this is something we can collectively be proud of. And I want to work with this Parliament to make a forceful European contribution to this international debate. But there is also what we usually call the real economy. And we all know that day by day, the evidence builds that we are facing a serious economic slowdown. The impact is being felt on jobs, on household incomes, on order books of businesses, large and small. One thing must be clear. There is no national road out of this crisis. Our economies are too intertwined. We will swim or sink together. We must not give in to the siren calls for protection. We must not turn our backs on globalization or put our single market at risk. This will remain the motor of growth in the European Union. Neither can we go on with business as usual. Europe's economy needs a boost to recover, to continue to grow, to provide employment. First, inside Europe, we will have to redouble our efforts to address long-term issues and to be in better shape to tackle the challenges ahead, making Europe a knowledge economy, investing more in research and development and innovation. The revised Stability and Growth Pact leaves sufficient flexibility for Member States' budget policies to react to the current exceptional circumstances and to promote growth and jobs. But we also need to look beyond our borders. Trade has been key to European growth over recent years. Now is the time to be proactive about market access, to make the case that trade barriers will help nobody. I hope you will have all learned the lessons that protectionism only makes recovery harder. European industry needs support. SMEs need to be free to concentrate on their market. That is why, for example, we recently proposed that our smallest business should be exempt from the excessive burden in terms of accounting rules and statistical reporting. Large manufacturing needs help too. I want to be sure that we are using European programs to best effect, like our Competitiveness and Innovation Programme and the Research Framework Programme. We need to reinforce the synergies between our Lisbon strategy for growth and jobs and our climate and energy agenda. Promoting investment in low-carbon technologies and energy efficiency measures will, at the same time, support our competitiveness, our energy security, and our climate change agenda. The European Investment Bank will be a valuable partner in this endeavour. And Europe's citizens need support too, especially the more vulnerable. It is critically important that at a time of rising unemployment, we maintain investment in training, We develop new skills and prepare people to take advantage when opportunities return. Advancing on our social agenda for access, opportunities and solidarity is more important than ever. We shall review the role the Globalization Adjustment Fund can play. In all these areas, we need to be intelligent about how we act. We need to get the most out of every step we take. Smart action means hitting 2 targets with 1 shot. For instance, helping the construction industry, yes, but doing this by promoting an energy-efficient housing stock. Using state aids where necessary, yes, but in line with the guidelines directing state aid towards environmental support and research and development. Helping key industries like cars, why not? But preparing them for tomorrow's markets of clean cars. Smart support, this is what our industry needs, and not protectionism. This I want to underline very clearly. Our Lisbon strategy, package in December, will be the opportunity to bring these different strands together. There is no magic bullet to turn around the European Union economy. What we have to do is take every option, explore every potential way in which European Union policy can help member states to seize every opportunity to put Europe on the road to growth. That is our task. That is our task in the coming weeks. That's what we are preparing. And this is a task I want to tackle together with the European Parliament. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed living historic moments. The kind of occasion where the crisis calls into question old certainties and minds are more open to change. These are very special moments, and they are not happening every day. We have to understand that it's really one of those moments where there is some higher plasticity, and then when we can make a real change. These are moments when we know that today's decisions will have a decisive impact on tomorrow's reality. Change is what we need now. Change not to come back to the solutions of the past, but to find the solutions of the future, the solutions of the 21st century, of globalized world. Today, Europe can propose the principles and rules that will shape a new global order. We have an opportunity to come forward with proposals based on European values, based on open societies and open economies. As I said this weekend at Camp David, open societies need the rule of law and democracy. Open economies also need rules, the rules of transparency, sensible regulation and sensible supervision. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe shows its true colors in times of crisis. In Georgia, Europe was able to stop a war. In the financial crisis, Europe is leading the way towards a global solution. In the next few weeks, we must show that we are able to continue to lead on the fight against climate change and to build an energy policy for the future. Because we owe it to our citizens, our economies, our partners around the world, as well as to future generations of Europeans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of the Commission. Und wir kommen jetzt zur Aussprache.
And now the debate on behalf of the EPP. Chairman Joseph Daul, 5 minutes. President of Parliament, President of the European Council, President of the Commission, ladies and gentlemen. Twice this summer, Europe and the world have faced major crises. Twice, Europe has shown, by applying political will and by being united, it can not only adopt a strong position quickly, but also it can exercise influence and leadership for its partners around the world, for example, Georgia. On behalf of my group, I would like to welcome the exemplary action taken by the French presidency and its President, Nicolas Sarkozy, during these 2 major crises. He had no holidays this summer. He's been working ever since the beginning of the presidency. The present presidency of the Union is serving Europe and serving the people of Europe well. The presidency has shown that Europe can be present on the international stage. President, if I could, I'd be grateful if people were to listen to me. The presidency is showing that Europe is worth building. At the last European Council, the approach adopted by the Eurozone were confirmed unanimously. Whether we're talking about measures designed to install measures for regulation and surveillance or for the reform to the financial system and putting an end to golden parachutes. All these things have been agreed upon. We're going in the right direction, but the financial crisis is not behind us. But it's in crisis situations that we can adopt the rules for the future. And we must adopt rules for the future in these circumstances. Here and there, I hear people saying this is the end of capitalism, that this is the fault of the free markets. Well, in fact, free markets have shown they work. But if they're going to work, we now know they have to be accompanied and supported by rules and regulations. These rules and regulations have to exist. If they did exist, they weren't applied properly in this crisis. Now, I don't know exactly which financial ideology we should now apply, but we certainly have to work together with the whole international community and the central bank. And I welcome the Presidency's initiative here, calling together our partners to define a new world financial policy and financial order. What is important is that small companies and small people don't see all their efforts wiped out. What we have to do is make sure that entrepreneurs, and especially SMEs, should be able to continue to finance their activities. Otherwise, we will not achieve a growth and employment at reasonable rates. Our group will support any measure designed to guarantee a European model which guarantees our social markets and which exercises solidarity, especially in crises such as this. Ladies and gentlemen, with respect to the Lisbon Treaty, once again, I would call on those member states which have not ratified to do so as quickly as possible, so that we have that we're all together as we run into ratification. I'm asking for this because we see difficulties for Europe to be able to work properly if we don't have a unanimity rule and without a stable presidency. We welcome the European Council's decision to draw up a roadmap towards ratification. And if the Nice Treaty continues to apply in the forthcoming months, then it should apply both to the European Parliament as well as to the European Commission. That is why I would call on everybody here to assume their responsibilities. The Commission, which takes office in autumn 2009, and which the Parliament whose President the Parliament will be installing on the 15th of July next, will have fewer commissioners than member states. That is also the Nice Treaty. And a Parliament with fewer members and a Commission with fewer members will be what we have. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Council has adopted the European Pact on Immigration. This is a fine success, but many other challenges await us. Climate, energy, defence, amongst others. And it's only by working on the model of society we believe in and by consolidating our social market economy that we'll be able to come up with credible and sustainable responses for future generations. President in office of the Council, carry on with your work. We are going to do the best we can here in Parliament so that by the end of the year we will all have a credible vision for Europe, for the world and for the future of our children and grandchildren. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, and now on behalf of the Socialists, Martin Schulz for 5 minutes. President, ladies and gentlemen, we saw an image over the weekend, and it was a historical image in actual fact. We saw the worst president of the USA in human memory meeting an effective president of the EU Council and president of Commission, and they were looking at internal market policy in Europe. This was a historical occasion and a major opportunity for Europe. And in order to take an appropriate place in international policy, the policy of the Bush administration, which involves the total deregulation of the world's market, total laissez-faire, irrespective of what measures that would involve, has proven itself to be utterly bankrupt. And now in Europe we need to have a more social economic order, not just in Europe but in the world, and that is the task that lies ahead of us, and once again that is a task of historical dimensions. Mr. Sarkozy, you have made some good points. You have adopted the requisite measures to help us out of the credit crunch crisis. And we support you here. And I won't conceal the fact that we are impressed by the resolution with which you have tackled this. And I'd like to thank Mr. Barroso as well, because he personally, not the Commission, has also shown a great deal of resolution. However, we need to make full use of the opportunities available to us. The necessary actions have to be taken, and we should say never again. Never again should we allow a repetition of the kind of disaster that's befallen the markets now, the international financial markets. And this has triggered a crisis in the real economy, and this really ought to be the last time that such a thing happens. It should never be repeated, never again. That's why we need new rules, and we need you, Mr. Barroso, to come up with these new rules. My colleague, Mr. Nurek Rasmussen, will set out in a few moments exactly what we expect of you between now and the end of the year, because we want the proposals that you have announced to be a reality by the end of the year, because we need to respond quickly, and responding quickly means that we have to put the rules at centre stage. Now we're talking about banks, private equity and so on. A few weeks ago, in fact, we took decisions unanimously about these issues. Now, you've heard Social Democrat speeches, and Mr. Sarkozy has been the head of the UEP for years now, Conservative President of France, is talking like a good old-fashioned European socialist. José Manuel Durão Barroso, in fact, in an echo of his Maoist past, is talking like a true left-winger, and Joseph Daul, listening to you, what you're saying is pure, undiluted, unadulterated social democracy. Now, I'd like to read out a quote, so pick up your ears, gentlemen. In the last few decades, some of our member states and the European Union as a whole have been over-regulated, and they have sealed themselves off, battened down the hatches. This undermines our competitiveness. Now that is the manifesto of the EPP, the European People's Party from 2006, and Mr. Sarkozy signed it, as indeed did Mr. Barroso and Joseph Daul. You're a bit late, colleagues, but I'm very glad that you have arrived at long last, even though it's late. And when I debate things with you, I really have to wonder, what about the ordinary people, the small fry in the EU? What about the taxpayer who are being burdened to clean up this disaster? What about the purchasing power that we need to revive the internal market? We are entering into a phase where there's a serious risk of recession. We need more purchasing power. We need to make sure that we can cover the risks of the small people in Europe, the ordinary citizens. Now, if we're coming up with plans here, we need to think of our ordinary citizens, the workers of Europe. And this is why we want more rules, more monitoring, and we want to make sure that we afford adequate protection to the ordinary citizens. We need to give them as much protection as we give to the big fish, the banks. Now, let me read out another quote for you, if I may. The state must withdraw from economic and social policy. Angela Merkel said that. It was at the party congress of the CDU in 2000. Well, actually, no, the state shouldn't be withdrawing. It should intervene to a greater extent in the economy. It has to carry out more monitoring. Now, thanks to Mr. Sarkozy and Mr. Barroso, they're saying that the same thing. They're singing from the same hymn sheet. They're saying that we need more supervision. We need more rules. So you're on the right track. Now, another point, you would continue to be on the right track, and you would continue to enjoy our support if you start looking at the climate package, which has the potential to create jobs. That will allow for a sustainable economy. Now here, I don't think that the climate package should be played off against the credit crunch. Jean-Claude Juncker has said that the credit crunch will pass, but unfortunately the climate crisis will continue to persist. And you're right, Mr. Sarkozy, this has to be dealt with on the basis of reciprocal solidarity between the strong and the weak, and everyone in the Parliament and the Council has to work to solve that. President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, President, for letting me speak for a minute over my speaking time that was allotted to me. But one clear marker put down by social democracy will remain. In this crisis, we are trying to fight for rights, and these values are on the agenda. And if you would agree with us, you would have learned at long last. But remember, it was your errors, your mistakes that led us into this situation in the first place. Thank you.
So, wir waren mit der Redezeit jetzt etwas inflationär, das sollte sich nicht wiederholen.
People have been overshooting their speaking time and will have to stop that. Graham Watson now for the Liberals.
President in Office, you brought us warm and encouraging words from last week's Council. You said that Council and Parliament must work hand in hand, travailler main dans la main. But our job is to read the small print. Why do the Council conclusions refer only to cooperation between Council and Commission? Why in all the paragraphs on climate change is there no mention whatsoever of the European Parliament? In paragraph 16 of this document, you should have invited the European Parliament, not just the Commission, to work with you, and recognised that Council and Parliament will decide, not the Council alone. Moreover, President in Office, you will find you need the European Parliament, because some Member States are trying to unpick properly reached agreements. Europe must stick to its negotiated targets, and it's dishonest of some governments to say that the new economic climate makes those agreements unachievable. New emissions targets for the car industry will not be enforced until 2012. The emission sharing proposals apply only after 2013, long after the global economy is forecast to pick up. Postponing action now will invite climate catastrophe and an even bigger bill. We need more than the Council agreed last week. President in Office, you rightly recognise the power of the markets. Since the Berlin Wall fell, 50 million Europeans have been lifted out of poverty, because the free movement of goods, services and people is the key to Europe's prosperity. More than that, it is vital to our liberty. Today we are seeing what happens when markets lack accountability. In recent weeks, the global finance system has stared into an abyss, and we need concerted action to pull it back. So my group welcomes the Council's consolidation of the measures agreed by the euro area. They have alleviated the pressure on the interbank markets. Now we need to steer interest rates downwards to alleviate recession. We welcome also the Commission's Capital Requirements Directive, the new accounting standards, the plans to control credit rating agencies. Europe must play a leading role too in negotiating a global system of financial governance. But while rules are necessary, so are the means to enforce them. And the summit failed to agree an effective regime to supervise the financial system in Europe. I have made the case, President, for a European Financial Services Authority, and it's rumoured that the President in Office also favours rigorous supervision at European level. Try with the Americans to get a global agreement by all means, but proceed without them if they won't play ball. Supervision of the financial services industry remains the missing piece of the jigsaw. President in Office, you are a man of action. Your actions underline the case for a full-time President of the Council. You draw attention to our successes. In August, Europe kept the tanks out of Tbilisi. This month, Europe has kept the banks in business. If, in December, Europe acts to preserve the planet, then we should convince even the most sceptical that we need the Lisbon Treaty.
Vielen Dank, Graham Watson. Für die grüne Fraktion Daniel Cohn-Bendit, 5 Minuten.
Thank you, Graham Watson. Now for the Greens, Daniel Cohn-Bendit, 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, Messieurs les Présidents,
President and President, I would be the last not to recognise and energy and willpower are required in politics, and here the French President has just showed us an energy level and a degree of will which is a very good thing for Europe. Sometimes, however, I think I'm dreaming. I think I'm dreaming when we talk about crises, because all crises, the financial crisis, the environmental crisis, and hunger around the world are all interdependent. They are interdependent, and we can't deal with a crisis, one crisis, without dealing with the others. And apart from that, it's wrong to say that the crisis began in July, in September or in August. It began years ago. And I think we should be, you know, self-critical, a little tiny bit, at least the former French finance minister, and also the European Commission should be self-critical, because it rejected all European regulation of financial flows a year ago. You'd all be more credible, you know, as we run into the future, if you were a little more self-critical in the light of your past mistakes. I mean, you're saying the present crisis is a tsunami we could not have forecast. No, not true. And from that it follows that you could say that the logic of crisis is the following. It's simple. It's always, you'd always do more. Act as quickly as possible, act as much as possible. But those who created the environmental crisis, the financial crisis and hunger in the world are now saying we have to react fast and strongly. In the meantime, you have been calling for unbridled growth. And this is how we get a financial crisis. Everybody now is talking about starting up the financial markets again, remoulding them, refounding capitalism. But at the same time, you have to talk about an environmental market, a social environmental market. That's what we need. That's what we have to do. That's to say, we have to question the very foundations of the way we produce things, the way we manufacture things, the way we live. If we don't put these difficult questions, very difficult questions, once again, we're going to go to the wall. That's why, when you, President, say, for example, that cars, we have to relaunch our car or our automobile industry, fine. But at the same time, we have the Germans wanting to have waivers from CO2 regulations in the future, and at the same time they want money to support their automobile industry. But it's the German motor industry which made the most profit in the last 10 years. They have money in tax havens. They've got money. So why give money to Mercedes, to BMW, to Audi, so for them to hide it away in tax havens? I don't agree. I don't agree. Now listen, Mr. Schulz, when you were talking to the right a moment ago, well, I'd like to talk to the left and the right, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. They all agreed, you all agreed with the German industrial lobby to ask for waivers for the climate criteria for their industry, and that's the truth. You supported them. And no, I'm right, Mr. Schulz. I'm right, Mr. Social Democrat. No, no, no. I don't accept your insult. That's not worthy of you. No, 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 no. Let me carry on. This is important. Listen, I'd like to talk. No, no, I've got the floor, Mr. Schulz. You be quiet. I've got the floor. When we talk about growth, what kind of growth? We have to debate what kind of growth and how we're going to achieve it. The state has now a stakeholder in banks through these nationalizations and so on. And now the debate is, how are we going to invest? How and why are we going to invest? We have to decide precisely what we want to do. If we're going to invest in further climate degradation, we'll be making the same old mistakes. That's why we have to be talking about a plan for Europe to relaunch the European economy, but relaunch it in an environmental way. A green deal, not just any old one. We need a green deal. Now on tax havens. You've been a finance minister. Mr. Sarkozy. And now what you have to do is oblige anybody, any company, any bank which puts money in a tax haven, the tax haven has to declare the country of origin of the money to achieve transparency. And that's how we start tackling companies using tax havens. That is an important decision which could help us make progress. It has to be taken. And finally, I'd like to talk about the climate package. President, you, and Mr. Watson's right on this, you've organised an institutional push by saying that decisions like this should be taken by the European Council unanimously. You have opened Pandora's box for vetoes from the from Poland, Italy, and Germany. Rather than leave things as they are, with votes having to be taken in parliamentary committees, without the Commission having to be involved, without the environment ministers having to be involved. With that setup, it's possible to take climate decisions with co-decision with a qualified majority. Now, by putting this off to December and saying this should be done by the European Council, that's a mistake, and you're going to pay the price for that, because now you're going to be at the mercy of the veto of the countries I have just mentioned. So I say yes to have greater will to build Europe, yes for putting energy into Europe, yes for European progress, yes for an independent Europe, yes for a European debate. But we still have great differences on how the house of European democracy and the environmental substance of Europe, and the way we're going to relaunch Europe in an environmental way.
Thank
you, Mr. Cohn-Bendit. I think Mr. Schulz and myself agreed on the question of speaking time being kept to. Then you and Muscardini, 3 minutes. Thank you, President. I 100% agree with the statements you made, Mr. Sarkozy made for the presidency, on what's being done over these difficult months, and the proposals seem decent to us. However, I would like to remind the President of the Commission that to explore certain hypotheses which theoretically we might agree with means making sure that certain commissioners, including Competition Commissioner, do the right thing. Your statement on the heating oil, I think, has not reassured the markets or brought in market security. And I think we need to have something more on financial derivatives. Derivatives have excoriated the markets and laid low some European states. When Mr. Sarkozy espouses the will of each and every one of us, that is for Europe, a president which is not 6 monthly, but something which is worthy of the profile of a united Europe now. Perhaps not equal, but united, which would allow us together to really pinpoint problems and find strategies to be able to fight and resolve them. The crisis is systemic, but in order to combat a systemic crisis, you need a new system. And Mr. Sarkozy is going to have to recast global capitalism. And maybe we should say go a bit further and say that market freedoms is not untrammeled liberalism. A system based on capital nowadays has to be linked with the social and the freedom aspect. Banks have failed, banks are failing. Whereas perhaps we could have done more. Our European Central Bank could have done a bit more to help them. And perhaps you, President, before your term of office, I think you actually suggested that. I think we need more cooperation and collaboration between political management and economic management. You can't manage the economy unless you have an overall political vision which inspires the goals to get to. And we hope that in the future there will be greater control by the central bank over over the financial system as a whole. We can't act in, neither can it act in splendid isolation. So thank you very much on the Immigration Pact and the Asylum Pact. That's one last note. It's an example of common rules and common approach to a sector which is of importance to us all, and where we are, I think, fairly united. And maybe we could harmonize criminal and non-criminal sanctions to fight speculators and those who put at risk the safety of consumers and the economy at large. Thank you. Now for the GUI NGL group, Francis Woods for 5 minutes.
Thank you, President, President of the European Council, President of the Commission. Never since the creation of the European Parliament did we have to react to a multidimensional crisis of the amplitude and seriousness as this one. We may well fear the worst is still to come. The southern countries, partners of the European Union, are upon an abyss. We have the energy crisis, to which is added the financial crisis. Well, they are suffering this, though they're not at fault. Everything is falling, growth is falling. They are the forgotten ones internationally, to the extent that Mr. Diouf of FAO recalled that only 10% of the emergency funds promised by the major powers in June last have come forward. Capitalism really has a lot to do still to improve things. The emerging countries are affected by the crisis. We cannot assess the social consequences of this. Iceland, a small state, threatened with bankruptcy. Within the European Union, new member states such as Hungary, no longer able to sell their treasury bonds, have major acute problems which will bring about incredible sacrifices from the population. Countries such as the United Kingdom, Ireland, Spain, the President mentioned a number of examples, and everywhere the shock has been felt. In France, this is probably the case too, if recession is going to make the industrial relations even worse. We have a drop in public expenditure and plans of privatizing public services are ahead. You may say this is not for debate, because the dimensions of this crisis is unfathomable. We have seen across the Atlantic and across the Channel the effects, but the European Union has obviously been involved. And the model that we have, which the Commission is presenting to us month after month, the basis of our case history at the court, is what we have to rely on. This is why, President of the European Council, I cannot share your view of the terrible evil besetting our societies. Of course, we need to look for solutions in New York, but the fuel that is set alight is in Europe and in America too. We all need to be accountable to our citizens. We cannot just escape this by taking measures, accountancy, and bringing in regulations or doing away with golden handshakes or parachutes. This is a diabolical spiral, wage deflation, and waste of the Earth's resources, and marginalizing part of the world's population as well. There's one indicator that is clear. Only 2% of monetary transactions concern production and services. 98% is to do with finance. We must attack the roots of the evil. The profits are totally incompatible with the capacities available, and with really sustainable development. Bretton Woods, a new Bretton Woods, should bring about mastery of monetary creation across the world. That's to replace the false currency such as the dollar by a true one, which will provide a lever to correct any inequalities which are unsustainable and destabilizing for the whole world, so as to contribute to balanced development throughout the world. We are so far from that that at the present we should avoid overstating what we want to do. Unless the leaders are inspired by the principle of changing everything so that nothing will change, but then we will have a very painful awakening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wurtz, also for sticking to the speaking time. Now, Bruno Gollnisch, Nigel Farage for the Independence and Democracy Group, 2 minutes.
President Sarkozy, it was your own energy, dynamism and initiative that sent you off to Georgia and Russia to try and broker a deal. You did it off your own bat. You were not acting on behalf of the European Union. It's a delusion if anybody in this place thinks you were. There'd been no council meeting, there was no resolution, and there was no mandate. You did it as the French president, and well done you. But if you're proposing that that's the model for which we should sort out our foreign affairs in the future, the idea that a permanent president or a permanent foreign minister decides on the hoof what the foreign policy of all of us should be, and goes off and does this without reference to national governments and national parliaments, well, the answer has got to be no thank you very much indeed. And as far as the financial crisis is concerned, I'm delighted that your original plan, that everybody should club their money together in the middle, fell to pieces. It was a good thing that the Irish and the Greeks and the Germans went off and acted in their own national interest. What happened at the summit was more a case of nation states agreeing with each other, which is fine and which I'm happy with. But I haven't heard anybody today recognise that this financial crisis is, as much as anything else, a failure of regulation. We haven't had a lack of regulation. Under the Financial Services Action Plan for the last 10 years, we've had a blizzard of regulation. It has damaged the competitiveness of places like London, and it has not protected a single investor. So please, more regulation is not the answer. We need to rethink what we've been doing. And I think we need to start acting in our own national interest. The fact that our banks cannot pay dividends for the next 5 years, whereas the Swiss banks can, is something that proves that if you've got the flexibility and adaptability of being outside the European Union, you can weather financial crises far better than being stuck in the middle. Thank you.
For the non-attached group, Bruno Gollnisch, 2 minutes.
Monsieur le Président du Conseil de la République française, nous discutons des soins palliatifs à apporter aux malades.
We are looking at palliative things here, President, but we're very quiet on the causes of the illness. No institution of the Union has saw this crisis coming. The Council, Commission or Central Bank, none of them, nor even our Parliament, dear colleagues. None of the governments of Member States foresaw this crisis, apart from a few economists, Maurice Allais, Nobel Prize winner. And Jean-Marie Le Pen voice wailing in the wilderness, unfortunately. But it was manifest looking back in this globalized world, unfettered freeing up and decoupling financial side of things, which was becoming more and more full of friction, and the real economy, which is now declining. And third country sovereign funds are swooped in and profited. So what you're doing now actually bears witness to the inability of the Union. Meeting bilaterally with Germany, a meeting with 15 or 7, there's never 27, a meeting with the President of the United States to try and convince him to organize a further meeting, theoretically to recast the whole system from zero. Only 6 of the 27 member states of the United States, Japan, Russia and India would be involved in this putative summit. I don't say it's not useful, but you're going back to bilateral diplomacy, multilateral. diplomacy, not all-inclusive. It shows really that red tape and bureaucracy has taken over. European Union cannot act. It is out of date, and the European Council bears witness to that as well. If you read between the lines, it's ratifying the various initiatives you mentioned. It's begging the central bank to ease up the Maastricht criteria, but it decides upon nothing. You talk about the situation in Georgia and your efforts there. But how is it that you don't see that unilateral recognition of the independence of Kosovo paved the way to South Ossetia and Abkhazia? And how do you justify indefinite expansion of NATO when the Warsaw Pact just has disappeared? Think about it, President. You have to think about it. You have to have a radical break with the globalizing system, and the freedom of movement, goods and capital throughout the world has to be thought. We have to rethink our identities, not to isolate ourselves, but doing it properly is really sine qua non a return to influence in the world. Thank you.
Now the President in Office of Council for the Council.
President, Mr. Daul, I'm grateful for your support. The EPP always believed in a protective Europe, Europe that protects. You yourself were involved in the dialogue with our Russian neighbors. That was a visionary position. Russia has the energy, Europe has technology. Russia is faced with a considerable problem of democracy building, or demography, losing a large number of population every year. In a territory much larger than the United States of America. I don't see Russia as a determined adversary of Europe. Quite on the contrary, I believe that in the future we need to lay the foundation for a common economic area between Russia and the European Union, which would indeed be the best way of obtaining from them to come closer to the values of respecting human rights and democracy, which we believe in Europe. Might I add, President Daul, that if we had wanted to support the banks, it was to protect savers. There are a number of strategies. A number of countries wanted to protect and guarantee the income of banks, and I wanted to have the banks protected so that they then, in turn, can do their work. And the support from your group was essential for us. I might conclude in saying that your call for ratification of the Lisbon Treaty is right. And in fact, it's not being aggressive against anybody to ask for consistency. You can't say that we didn't vote for because we're afraid of losing a commissioner, and in refusing maintaining a treaty that provides for a reduction in the size of the Commission. I respect all opinions, but I cannot agree with inconsistencies. You can't at the same time be willing and calling for enlargement of Europe, but at the same time preventing Europe from having the institutions that would support such enlargement. We've seen how much it costs Europe, this enlargement, without thinking of deepening. Don't let's make the same mistakes again. President Schulz. So, I speak like a European socialist, possibly, but let's agree, you don't really speak like a French socialist. Quite frankly, in the socialist schism, I would choose Martin Schulz without any regret whatsoever. But let me say something. This, incidentally, is what Europe is all about. We are obliged to strike compromises, but that is what we are doing. that is Mr. Schulz and myself, Europe, its institutions, its policies, one day, whatever happens, will be adopted and applied by governments on the left and on the right. That's indeed the greatness of the European model, to reduce the European idol to this ideal, to the questions of left and right. Fortunately, President Schulz, men of your quality are able to agree and recognize that others outside your political family are not necessarily wrong because they don't belong to that same family of yours. But let me say to you and to your group that as President in Office of Council, even though my loyalty goes to the EPP, I do appreciate the sense of responsibility of the Socialist Group when it is about taking certain decisions. To reduce Europe to left and right is a sin against the European compromise, the European ideal. I don't see any renouncement on your part when you support the presidency, nor vice versa when I support the position of the Socialist Group in the European Parliament. And let me go a bit further. President Schulz said that it was a historic task. He's right. And like President Daul says, this crisis may be an opportunity. You are right, of course. And you are right. Yet again, it's not about Christian Democrats on the one hand and Social Democrats on the other side. It's a question of common sense, of good sense. What got us there? But where I would agree less is to consider that in 30 years only the right-wing governments voted in favor, whilst the left-wing were always right. That would be rewriting history, painful for all parties. And as for what you said about Mrs. Merkel, I thought that there were elections in Germany, and so I would think that this is more electoral talk. I would indeed was very pleased to count on the loyalty and solidarity of Angela Merkel, and I would pay tribute to her action when she was in the presidency. These 6-month presidencies are part of a continuum, and I benefited from the hard work of my predecessors, amongst whom was Madam Merkel. Mr. Watson, I fully appreciate both your person and your ideas, but even though you can read small print, even without specs, it seems. Well, maybe that day you didn't have your specs, because what does the text say? It refers exclusively conclusions to the European Council of March 2007 and March 2008. And what do those two decisions say? That the climate package will be adopted in co-decision with the European Parliament. There is a continuum of the text, Mr. Watson. So what I want to do, maybe it was a mistake. The European Council publishes 50-page communiques that nobody reads. I said, that's it, no more. And I proposed a communique of 8 pages. And if you want to have a shorter communique, then you shouldn't do what you used to do, which is to take statements of previous councils to hide decisions of the present council. And I believe that co-decision did refer to the two councils. You asked me to confirm it. I'm quite happy to confirm it, but I'll go even further, Mr. Watson. In the climate energy package, I insist in saying that we will need the commitment of the European Parliament more than ever to obtain it. But all I wanted to do in October was the one thing, to preserve the consensus in the European Council, because do agree with me, if I come to the European Parliament with a decision from the Council saying that at any rate you must not agree before December, you would have said to me, and quite rightly so, you have broken the decisions in 2007 and 2008. having challenged the package, quite far from challenging that package, I committed myself, and I am calling for a co-decision rather than denying it. I said so to Mr. Barroso and my colleagues in the European Council too. Mr. Cohn-Bendit, listen, you're on top form. You said 5 times yes to me and twice no. I was used to a less favorable stance. And quite frankly, your support on determination and on a number of actions from the President is useful. In fact, I would say to you, Mr. Cohn-Bendit, that I believe that Presidency of the Commission and Presidency of the Council, committed as we are to defend the energy climate package, deserves the support of the Greens. We don't agree on everything, but you are not going to fight me, are you? You, the Greens, Council and Commission presidencies, committed totally in adopting the energy climate package. At least let us go part of the road together. You've been elected, I've been elected. There's no shame in that. I need you, and I recognize that, and you too need me. It may be a bit more painful for you than for me, but that's how it is. At any rate, you asked me to be self-critical. You're right. I need some of that. I'm not the only one. Anyway, on the institutional putsch, I'd say, as I said to Mr. Watson, and dare say Mr. Cohn-Bendit won't mind, but this crisis and the defense of the environment bring about opportunities for growth. You're right. You're calling it green growth. I call it sustainable growth. Undoubtedly so. I'd like to say to you that the bonus on the cars has shown this. France is the only automobile market that's not decreasing. And why? Thanks to the environmental bonus, we've managed to sell more clean cars than dirty ones. Perhaps the word clean cars is shocking to the Greens, but for us it's extremely important. And the Grenelle environment meeting in France, which got the unanimous vote for more, shows that France is committed in this direction. And I do think it would be a historic mistake for Europe not to meet the challenge of the energy climate package. Mrs. Muscardini, thank you for your support. You mentioned the immigration pact. You did well, because not much has been said about trains that arrive on time. But this is an extraordinary novelty for Europe. Agreement of the 27 on a pact. Of course, there's still some hitches. Of course, one might have wanted to go further. But yet, who would have been able to say that all of you here would have been wise enough, together with the states, to accept a pact on immigration only months from a European election? And it's the only way, believe me, to avoid that extremists will grab a subject which require intelligence, humanity and firmness. So thank you, Mrs. Muscardini, for having mentioned this point. Mr. Burt, you said that you don't share the same diagnosis. It's true, but your words, as always, very measured in the form and very excessive in the content. These things, Mr. Wirtz, are not more shocking because you say them gently. What counts is not the form only, it's also the substance. I'm sure that we need to recast capitalism, but I would say to you as well, Mr. Wirtz, there's never been so much damage caused as that of the collectivist system, which you supported for so many years. The major environmental disasters, Mr. Wirtz. Just listen to Mr. Cohn-Bendit when he talks about self-criticism. The main environmental disasters were not due to the market economy, but collective economy. That is the truth, Mr. Wirtz. And that system built the Berlin Wall. Millions suffered from lack of liberty. I am attached to the market economy. I am attached to freedom of opportunities, the values of capitalism, but not betrayal of capitalism. We could well take stock of the 20th century, you and me, and I dare say that is not in favor of the ideas that you loyally accompanied for decades. You may ask me to wake up, but I'm afraid, Mr. Wirtz, through our friendship, don't think too much about the 20th century and what happened there, because sincere people like you would then see that they accompanied systems that were well far away from their youth ideals. Mr. Farage, I didn't have a mandate, that's undoubtedly so, but quite frankly, when the Russian troops entered Georgia, they had no mandate either. You're amongst those who for years denounced this Europe for lacking political will. I had a choice to ask for the opinion of all the others and not to act, and then, but rather act and then ask the others whether they agreed. I preferred action. And finally, Mr. Farage, a Europe that looks as what you like it to look is perhaps less, but on substance, it's a Europe that you would wish for. I would add that democratically speaking, I ensured with Bernard Kouchner that the European Council validates the decision we took. Finally, when the Irish, and I'm not making a value judgment, the crisis was very serious, took the decision to guarantee all the capital of banks, excluding the European ones. Well, what happened then? The city in 24 hours had no liquidity left, because liquidity was leaving the city to go to the guaranteed banks in Ireland. And that government decided 200% of its GDP. We need each other, as you can see. Everybody would have joined the spiral and would have gone to those that offered most, and the savings would have gone to the countries that offered more to the detriment of the others. And you, who defend the United Kingdom, well, it was Europe that ensured that the city's balance was re-established, not the United Kingdom on its own. In fact, finally, Mr. Golnish, you may be the only one in the world to think that Europe is useless. Either one or the other. The world is wrong and you are right, or the other. I'm afraid once again it's the other that's right.